Middle fire month, 8th month, 26th day 1858. Sebas currently resided in a high-end residential district of the royal capital with good security. This particular dwelling was smaller than the mansions on either side, as though it were built as a home for the servants of the families which inhabited the surrounding buildings. However, it was still too large for Sebas and Solution alone. They had rented such a large place for a reason, of course. Since they were posing as members of a wealthy household from afar, they could not possibly live in a run-down old house. For that reason, and because they did not have any credentials to present, or any connections, they had to pay several times more than the going price to the builders' union when leasing the home. In addition, they had to pay in one lump sum, which amounted to quite a large expense. Sebas received a prompt reception when he arrived at the house and walked in the front door. That someone was dressed in white. She was one of Sebas' subordinates, Solution Epsilon of the Pleiades battle maids. The house's other residents included shadow demons and gargoyles, but they were assigned to sentry duties and would not come out to meet him. "Welcome back." Solution cut her words off mid-speech, and she had even frozen mid-bow. She glared at the object Sebas was carrying with eyes that were colder than usual. "Sebas-sama, what is that?" I picked her up. Solution did not reply to that terse answer. However, the air seemed to get heavier around them. "I see. I do not believe it is a present for me, so may I ask how you intend to dispose of that?" "Well now, could you start by healing her wounds?" "Healing?" Solution looked at the girl Sebas was holding. Once she understood, she shook her head and stared at Sebas. If that were the case, would it not suffice to bring her to the temple? Indeed. Silly me, I completely forgot about that. Seeing that Sebas was completely unmoved, Solution fixed her cold gaze on him. Their eyes met for a second, and in the end it was Solution who blinked first. "Shall I throw it away, then?" "No. I've brought her back. We should think about how best to handle her." "I understand." Solution was the type who lacked expressions of their own, but her face now could have been used as a mask. Even Sebas could not read the emotions dwelling within her eyes. All he could tell was that Solution was thoroughly displeased with the present circumstances. "Could you please perform a health examination on her?" "I understand." "Then, I shall immediately." "Isn't that too?" The girl meant nothing to Solution, but even so, giving her a checkup at the front door was hardly a good thing. There ought to be a spare room inside. "Could you perform the examination there?" Solution nodded silently by way of reply. Neither of them spoke as they brought the girl to the guest room. Granted, Sebas and Solution had never been the type for conversation, but that did not explain the awkwardness between them. Solution opened the door for Sebas, who was holding the girl in both hands. The heavy curtains were closed and so the room was dark, but it did not feel stuffy in the least. The door had been opened many times before, so the air inside was fresh, and the interior was spotlessly clean. The room itself was lit by thin ribbons of moonlight streaming in between the gap in the curtains. After entering, Sebas gingerly laid the girl down upon the clean sheets of the bed within. He had infused the girl with ki, and performed some basic healing. However, she remained as motionless as a corpse. Then, Solution carelessly stripped the girl of the cloth which covered her, revealing a bruised and battered body. That ghastly sight should have made for difficult viewing, but Solution's expression was unchanged, and she had a dull, disinterested look in her eyes. "Solution, I'll leave the rest to you." With that, Sebas left the room. Solution did not look like she wanted to call him back as she began her diagnosis. Now that he was in the corridor, he should not have heard Solution as she quietly said, "How foolish." Her mumblings vanished into the corridor, and naturally, nobody replied to them. Sebas stroked his beard without thinking about it. Why had he saved that girl? Even he could not explain why. Was it pity? No, that was not it. Why had he saved her? Sebas was a butler, and he was also in charge of Nazarik's manservants. His loyalty belonged to each of the 41 supreme beings. He owed his faithful service to the guildmaster who had taken the name of Ainzu. His loyalty was genuine. He could confidently say that he would gladly throw his life away in service to the Supreme One. However, if, hypothetically speaking, he had to choose only one of the 41 supreme beings to obey, Sebas would pick the man called Touch Me without hesitation. He was the mightiest being in Ainzu, and the one who had made Sebas. He was a world champion and an incomparable figure of fame. The guild had primarily flourished by Peking. Who would dare believe that Touch Me, of the original 9, had founded the group which predated the guild in order to protect the weak? Yet, that was the truth. When Manga had been repeatedly PK'd and nearly quit the game in anger, it was Touch Me who had saved him. When Buka Uchigama could not find anyone to adventure with her due to her looks, it was Touch Me who had reached out to her. The lingering will of that man was the invisible chain which now bound Sebas. Could this be considered a curse? Those words were terribly rude. If any of the other beings who served Ainzu, who had been created by the 41 supreme beings, were present and heard these words, they might have well attacked him on the spot for his lack of respect. It is wrong to show pity and offer aid to those who do not belong to Ainzu, Sebas muttered grimly. That was only to be expected. Every member of Nazarik save those who had been programmed otherwise by the 41 supreme beings, like the head maid, Pestonia S. Wonko firmly believed that abandoning those who did not belong to Ainzu was the right course of action. For instance, he had once heard from Solution that one of her fellow battlemaids, Pleiades, Lupus Regina, got along very well with a girl from Kani village. However, Sebas was abundantly aware that if anything arose, Lupus Regina would cast that girl aside without hesitation. That was not because she was cruel. If the supreme beings ordered them to die, they would kill themselves without delay. If the supreme beings ordered someone dead, they would kill them, even if their target was a friend of theirs. On the other hand, anyone who did not understand this would receive looks of pity from their comrades. Making a decision based on human, in other words, worthless sentiments was the wrong thing to do. But what about himself? Had he taken the correct course of action? Just as Sebas was about to bite through his lip, Solution stepped out of the room. Her face was still a blank mask. How did it go? She is suffering from syphilis and 2 other sexually transmitted diseases. Several of her ribs and fingers are broken. The tendons on her right arm and left leg have been severed. Her upper and lower incisors have been pulled out. Her organ function is diminished and she has a fissured anus. There are signs of drug addiction. In addition, there are countless traces of contusions and lacerations. This concludes the basic summary of her condition. Do you require a more detailed explanation? No, I think not. The important thing is, can she be healed? Easily. Sebas had also expected that unhesitating reply. Healing abilities could even help someone who had all their limbs severed. In fact, Sebas could use Ki to heal just about any form of physical injury. The truth was that if he had not been worried about emergencies or the truth getting out, he could have healed the old lady's twisted ankle on the spot. That said, while his Ki could heal physical injuries, it could not help with poisoning or diseases as well, because Sebas had not learned those skills. Therefore, he had to ask Solution to help in that aspect. I'll leave it to you, then. If healing magic needs to be used, perhaps it might be better to look up Estonia-sama. There's no need to go to that trouble. Solution: you have a scroll of healing magic, do you not? After seeing solution not, Sebas continued. Use that, then. Sebas-sama. That scroll was bestowed upon us by the Supreme One. It should not be used on a mere human being. Indeed, he should have thought of some other way instead. It would be best to heal her wounds and stabilize her first before curing her addiction and disease afterwards. However, he did not know if he had the time for that. If she was dying because of her addiction or diseases, healing her would be an exercise in futility unless said healing was constantly reapplied. After thinking about this, Sebas handed out an order to Solution in a voice of steel, the better to keep anyone from learning his true intentions. Do it. Solution narrowed her eyes, and a reddish-black flame seemed to flare in their depths. However, Solution bowed her head in acknowledgement to hide that change. I understand. I am to restore that female to a pristine condition. In other words, I will revert her body to the state it was before she engaged in those activities. Am I correct? After receiving Sebas' approval, Solution bowed again. I shall do so at once. Then, could I trouble you to boil some water and wipe her down after the treatment? I shall purchase something to eat. Nobody here need to eat and nobody here could cook. Neither did anyone here possess magic items which eliminated the need to eat. Thus, he had to obtain food for her. Sebas-sama. Healing the body is a simple task, but I do not possess the ability to heal mental traumas. Solution paused here and then looked straight at Sebas before continuing. If there is a need to heal such traumas, I feel it would be better to ask Ains-sama to lend his aid. Will you not ask him to do so? There is no need to trouble Ains-sama. We will leave the mental symptoms for later. Solution bowed deeply again. Then she opened the door and entered the room. As Sebas watched her leave, he slowly leaned against a nearby wall. How should he deal with her? The best way was to wait until she had been treated while the man was fleeing, for instance, and then take her to where she wanted to go and release her. He had to pick a location that was sufficiently far away from the royal capital. Telling her to walk out from here would not only be too dangerous but far too cruel. It would be no help at all. Still, was all this really the right thing for him, Sebas Chian, butler of Nazarick, to do? Sebas sighed heavily. If only that would allow him to physically expel the worries that had built up within his heart. However, it did not. His heart was pounding and his thoughts were a blur. How foolish I was to think that I, Sebas, would do all that for a human being. But no matter how hard he thought, he could not come to a conclusion. Thus, Sebas decided to stop seeking an answer. Right now, he ought to start by solving the simple problems. It might only be delaying the inevitable, but this was the best that Sebas could come up with at the moment. Solution changed the shape of her finger. The slender digit lengthened, becoming a syringe-like structure that was several millimeters thick. As a Shoggoth, Solution had always been able to make great alterations to her shape, so altering the thickness of her fingers was child's play. She glanced at the door, and once she sensed he was no longer outside, she quietly approached the woman on the bed. Since Sebas-sama has approved it, I might as well take care of this unpleasant business quickly. You would probably prefer it that way, no? Besides, it is not as though you were aware of it, are you? Solution reached inside her body with her untransformed hand and withdrew a scroll stored within herself. That scroll was not the only item Solution had concealed within herself. In addition to scrolls and other expendable magic items, she also contained quite a number of weapons, protectives and other war gear. This was nothing out of the ordinary considering her body could store several human beings. Solution looked at the unconscious woman. She was uninterested in her appearance. Only one thought ran through her mind. That was, this human doesn't look like it would taste good. This body looked like a walking corpse. It probably would not thrash wildly and delight Solution even if she melted at it with corrosives. I could understand Tsubasama's intentions if he intended to make her my toy after she recovered, but this... She was familiar with Tsubas's personality, since he was the leader of the Pleiades battlemaids. He would never permit such a thing. After all, he had not permitted her to capture and eat any humans during their journey, save the ones who had tried to ambush them. If Tsubasama had rescued her on orders from the Supreme One, then I would gladly obey. But is it really worth expending a valuable asset from the Supreme Beings on a mere human like this? Solution shook her head and dispelled those thoughts. Should I eat you before Tsubasama returns? Solution broke the seal and unfurled the scroll. The spell contained within was called Heal. It was a high-end healing magic of the 6th tier, and it could restore a great deal of health in addition to healing various diseases and other abnormal status conditions. Under normal circumstances, using the magic of the scroll would require levels in the appropriate job class. In other words, one would need cleric-type class levels to use clerical spells, which were divine magic. However, certain thief-type classes had the ability to emulate a class and use magical devices by deceiving them, such as with a scroll. As an assassin, Solution had levels in several thief-type classes. Thus, she was able to use this scroll of Heal, which he would not be able to use otherwise. Just in case, I should probably put her to sleep. After that, Solution used a skill to synthesize a sleeping poison cum muscle relaxant, which she injected into the girl.